Good afternoon and welcome to the NCSA CSD Security Talk for August 12th, 2020. I'm your host, Jeanette Dopp-Heide. Before we get to Kay's presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about NCSA and the CSD group for those of you who maybe aren't a member of NCSA who are attending. NCSA is the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. We're based at the University of Illinois. NCSA is a hub of transdisciplinary research and digital scholarship. It's made of U of I faculty, staff, students, and collaborators from around the globe. And our purpose is to unite to address and research grand challenges for the benefit of science and society. NCSA is supported by the state of Illinois, the University of Illinois, National Science Foundation, and grants from other federal agencies. About the Cybersecurity Division, also known as CSD, we're made of researchers, developers, and specialists who come together to advance the state-of-the-art cybersecurity. We apply these advances to key science and engineering user communities, and we provide the high performance and security of NCSA's networks and substantial computing resources. Our talk today is Chips Annoy, Web Cookies and How to Manage Them, with Kay Avila. Kay is a senior security engineer on the Incident Response and Security team. Prior to joining NCSA in 2017, she held positions in network engineering and security in higher education and in the private sector. She studied computer science and biology at the University of Northern Iowa and is currently pursuing a master's degree in library and information sciences at the University of Illinois. Before Kay begins, I have a few things to note. First, this presentation is being recorded, and participants are welcome to type questions in the chat box during the presentation. I'll try to find ways to ask Kay these questions, but we also are planning for time at the end of the presentation to go through any remaining questions. And with that, I'll hand things off to Kay. Kay, welcome.
Thanks, Jeanette. To echo Jeanette's thanks everyone for joining, and I also want to thank Jeanette for coordinating and advertising this talk, as well as her help coming up with the title and the abstract for this talk. So thank you everyone, and thank you Jeanette. I want to kick us off by asking a couple of questions, and if you read the abstract, you know the answer to this in advance, but why do kitchen gadgets appear on Facebook after looking up recipes online, or ads for running shoes pop up after searching for new training tips? How is Amazon able to save items in a virtual shopping cart to be purchased at a later date, or the library's website able to remember login information so a username and password aren't required each time it's accessed? Both of these questions are actually powered by the same technology, web cookies, also known as browser cookies or HTTP cookies. And we're going to spend the rest of this hour talking about this technology. But the point I want to make up front is that the web cookies aren't inherently an evil privacy stealing technology. In and of themselves, they're benign. They can be used to personalize the web and make it work more convenient for us, and they can be used to track our web browsing history in order to take advantage of our interests and get us to be more likely to open our wallets. Of course, it's the latter use that gets more attention, so that's what we're going to focus on today. In order to understand those darker parts, we do have to cover the basics, though, first, of how the technology works. Once we've covered that, we'll get into the annoying parts of cookies, how they're used to track your web browsing and tailor those ads. And finally, we'll dig into what tools are at your disposal for taking back some of your control. Before I dive into it, I'm going to make a quick disclaimer. I wanted to make this talk accessible for everyone, which is hard to do when we've got a wide range of experience levels and knowledge in this area. So there might be parts of this talk that you don't understand, and that's totally okay. Feel free to interrupt if you like, and I'll answer as I go if I can, or ask at the end. And on the other side, if you're familiar with some of this stuff, you're probably going to realize I'm glossing a little bit over the details and making some generalities. That's just so I can try and make it more accessible. Let's get a quick definition out of the way. What are web cookies? Well, very basically, they're just small pieces of information stored on your computer. That's it. When you visit a website, sometimes the website gives you a cookie. Next time you visit a page on that site, you send the cookie back to the website. So a cookie is almost like a little post-it note about yourself from the website that you hold on to on its behalf. Also kind of like a hello, my name is name tag, in that you're presenting it back to the website when you show up again or when you browse around. Like I mentioned before, they can serve many different purposes. They can be unique identifiers, so the website knows you're the same person who visited before. They might be used to save your preferences for a site. Like if you've ever been on a site that lets you set your preference for a skin, whether you prefer reading dark text on a light background or vice versa, that could be done with a cookie. They can save session information. So if you log into a website, as you browse around, the website knows that you're still the same person who authenticated earlier. And depending on how long the cookie's set to last, you might not have to log in again for several days or several weeks. That's cookies. And of course, they're also used for information gathering. If they were completely innocuous, you'd probably be a lot less interested in sitting through a talk about them. Let me show you some real-world cookie examples that I gathered from my browser. The interesting thing about these is since they're stored on my machine, I could go and look at them and actually modify them, which I'll do a demo of later. There's more to them than just this, but the basic anatomy behind them is that they come in these name value pairs and they're associated with the domain name. Very quick note, if you aren't familiar with the term domain, that's just the middle part of a URL. So it looks like my bold isn't showing that great on the slide, but in my https:/.org/recent, the domain part is /.org. So if you're looking at my list down below, the first one, the domain is support.mozilla.org, that cookie is fairly readable. Even though it doesn't have to be human readable, you can tell that, okay, I can kind of take a guess at what's being used here. The blue part is the name of the cookie, GOIP country code, and the value is US. That might be something if I wanted to, I could start tinkering around with. I can kind of reverse engineer what Mozilla is probably using that for. The second one I took off my computer after logging into my University of Illinois webmail. Again, slightly human readable with that logon data. You can see my usernames in yellow there. The Outlook session is a second cookie it's set, slightly less readable, probably only useful to the web server and not really anything that I can tamper with. And finally, that doubleclick.net one, we're going to talk a lot more about them later, but that's definitely a unique identifier for me, not something that I can modify or do anything really with. Let's talk specifically about how these came to be stored on my computer. We're going to do this by looking behind the scenes at what happens with a web request. So you open your web browser, you go to google.com, either by it loading automatically as your homepage or by typing the address in the address bar. I just want to point out quick, even if you're using that homepage, there's still a URL that your browser's loading, because I've had people be confused about this when they're talking with me before. So even homepage is always a URL. What's really going on here? Well, the first thing your computer requests when it connects to google.com, that laptop on the left is supposed to represent your computer, my computer, someone's computer, and Google's servers on the right, is the computer sends a GET request over HTTP, and it's getting /. That's the path. It's not trying to go to google.com/mycoolkittens.html. It's just trying to go to google.com/. So the computer sends a request to Google. Google responds back, okay, here's the content you asked for. That comes back in HTML. And when the computer starts processing that response, it sees, oh, there's a lot more that I need in order to be able to display this page to the user. I got the HTML, but I might need to get some CSS, some styling. I might need to get some images. I might need to get some scripts. And so the browser is going to process that on your behalf and then send additional requests to Google for all of that other content. For instance, when you go to Google, one of the first things you have to do if you haven't been to Google before, haven't been recently, is pull down that logo that shows on google.com. So then your computer has to make a second request to Google to say, okay, thanks for giving me /. Told me I need this particular Google logo _color, blah, 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 PNG. Can I have that now? And Google server says, yep, here you go. So how did the cookie, and so on and so forth. How do the cookies come into this? We're going to look at it again, but with cookies added. The first time you connect to Google, assuming you haven't connected to Google before or you've cleared your content, Google says, okay, you asked for /. Google says, okay, here's /. And the other thing Google says is, hey, by the way, here's a cookie. Would you hold on to this for me? And next time you talk to me, I'm going to want you to tell me about this again, please. So you say, okay, your browser's processing that /. It sees, oh, I need that logo. So it sends the request for the logo. And it says, oh, by the way, Google, here's this cookie that you asked for before. I'm handing it back to you for you to go ahead and see it. And Google says, okay, thanks, great. Here's your image. and so on and so forth. This brings us to our first demo. I think it's a lot more accessible if you actually see this happening, and I think for some people you're going to be surprised at how easy it is to watch this happening in real time. So I'm using Firefox, personal preference, it's what I'm most familiar with. The first thing I'm going to do, just to make sure I don't have any of this cached, is to clear all my offline web content. You can normally do that on Firefox by going up here and then going to the library and history and all that jazz and clearing it. In order to make it faster for this talk, I've installed this extension called Clear Browsing Data. It just does the same thing. So you'll see me clicking this multiple times throughout this talk to make sure I don't have anything cached. So I'm clearing all my data, clearing all my cookies. The next thing I'm going to do is enable this built-in Firefox web developer tool. And the one I want to look at is network. Once I reload this page, it's going to show us every single request that goes between my computer and Google as it asks for this page. I have it filtered because I don't want everything. I just want to see the HTML and the images. So I'm going to hard refresh here and load Google. And each one of these lines encapsulates both the request and the response. So this first one here, I can see my computer went out to try and get slash, and I'm going to click on it for more information. One of the really annoying things to me about Firefox Web Developer is it shows you the response information headers first before the request. So just to prove it to you what we're doing here, I'm going out to google.com, I'm trying to get slash, and this is everything that I send about me to Google. Now the one thing I'll point out that's sort of interesting here is my user agent. I'm telling Google, here's the information about my particular browser. But I'm not sending Google any cookies because I don't have any cookies yet. So let's look at Google's response to this. It responds back with a bunch of stuff. These are the headers. And it says, hey, by the way, set these cookies. My computer says, okay, let's look at the next request. I need to get that Google logo, this one that you can see as I'm mousing over, this one right here. So when I go to ask Google for that request, this time I send the cookie along with and say, hey, you gave this to me before, here it is back. Interesting thing is that you can really mess with some of these locally. You don't normally have a need to, the average user wouldn't want to, but I originally developed this talk for high school students, and they get really excited when they get to do stuff like this, and I think it's cool. So I also want to demo what it looks like in one particular site. And I'm using mobile.weather.gov because as I was looking for a site to demo, I figured out that their cookies are really human readable. And you probably wouldn't normally be going to mobile.weather.gov on a desktop. It's built for mobile phones, but I like it because their cookies are so clear and so easy to use. So I'm going to clear all my content again, just to make it easier. And I'm going to type in Champaign. So this is me just looking at my weather, my local weather. Comes back with the weather. I'm going to point out here this longitude and latitude that are arguments in the URL bar, because you're going to see these again in a second. So 40 and -88. If I go back to the main page here, now I can see that I have Champaign showing in my list. And I'm going to use an extension called Cookie Quick Manager to show you those cookies. So I'm going to look at all the cookies from mobile.weather.gov. Now they've given me these interesting ones. We'll come back to these. These are related to Google Analytics. But this is the one I want, where it shows, hey, this cookie whose name is NWS Mobile Locations, the value is, excuse me, Champaign, Illinois, and the longitude and latitude. So I can modify this, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So my husband and I love to go to Vegas, not because we're huge Vegas fans, but because we're huge hiking fans. And Vegas is awesome for being able to access a bunch of cool hiking places. Like, quick plug, you can go to the Mojave Preserve, Death Valley, Valley of Fire. It's awesome. And Vegas is fairly cheap to fly into. So let's say next time I go to this mobile weather site, I want Vegas to show up, but I don't want to show it as Vegas. I want it to remind myself that that's my dream vacation, and someday when it's safe to travel again, I'm going to go back. So I decoded it from URL format. I'm going to re-encode it to make it usable for the website, and then I'm going to save it. I'll go ahead and close this extension and reload here, and we'll see what happens. You can tell that I'm sending that request to mobile.weather.gov. and I'm sending that cookie that lives on my computer, but I've changed it. And so now I've changed the behavior of the website because it's reading the cookie's value. And if I click on Kay's Dream Vacation, it should show Vegas if I encoded it correctly. Looks like I added an additional 1 in the longitude, so that's not going to work. But you get the idea. I won't make you sit through me changing it back. If you do it on your own and you use the correct longitude and latitude, it will work. But I suppose this is interesting still because it shows that you can mess things up. You can mess up site functionality if you start messing with your cookies. Let's go back to the talk here. So far, we've been talking about what are called first-party cookies. The cookies are set by the web server, the domain, the website that I'm visiting. Let's go back to this question of why you see ads on Facebook after searching in Google. Cookies can also be set by a server that you weren't directly trying to visit. And those are called third-party cookies. The idea of tracking user behavior isn't that new, right? And some of this we sort of are comfortable with without having to think too much about. When we go to Amazon, for instance, we search for highlighters on Amazon, maybe buy some highlighters, and then the next day I go back and I'm searching for cat food and I'm getting suggestions for highlighters. Well, it makes sense that Amazon knows every request I send to Amazon, right? They know what I'm doing on their site. What's weirder is when you go to one website, like say, again, on Amazon, I'm searching for highlighters, and then I'm on Facebook, and now Facebook is sending me ads for highlighters. Intuitively, that just feels a little more disconcerting. And that comes in through these third-party, also known as tracking cookies. You may have heard this quote that goes around, if you aren't paying for a product, you are the product. This is how a lot of the internet services can be offered for free. Ads are what keep the internet flowing without us having to pay. There's a lot of money in selling the opportunity to be in front of your eyeballs. There's a whole ecosystem of businesses that are in the middle between you as the consumer and the companies that are selling their products. And the more they know about you, the better they can tailor those ads, making it more likely that you're going to click on a link. Do you want to clarify a tiny bit about the difference between cookies and ads, because this is another common misconception. Even if you turned off your cookies completely, you would still see ads. Cookies don't cause the ads in and of themselves. Unless you're using some sort of ad blocking tool, you're always going to see them. What the cookies do is allow these people, these companies that are displaying ads, to uniquely identify you, or in many cases your device, so they can tie that back to a web browsing history. If an advertiser doesn't know anything about you, it's probably going to be a shotgun approach. They're going to show you sort of general items that anybody might be interested in. Probably not anything that's too unique or too out of left field. But if you've been searching online for houses for sale and the marketing companies observed you doing that, they might internally, with that cookie that they set on your computer, on their servers, tie a little flag on you saying, hey, this person might be interested in relocation services. And that's how you might start seeing moving truck ads on other websites that the advertisers also have their ads and cookies on. It's not only in the advertiser's best interest to tailor these to you, it's actually also in the websites. They receive money for displaying the ads to you when you visit their site, and they receive sometimes more money if you actually click the link. The advertisers also receive more money if you click the link from the companies that are paying them, that are actually making the product. So everyone wants to make sure you're interested in what they're putting out. You'll often see a spin put on this in websites that'll give you the option to have ads tailored to you or not, where they say the advertisers are trying to help you. They're trying to make the ads more interesting and relevant. Well, that might be true, but at least for me, I'd much rather not have my thoughts and my spending purchases influenced by things that I'm seeing on the internet. So let's go back to the process before of how cookies get set, and let's look at how this works with third-party cookies. I think it may make more sense after you see this a second time. So same idea, where there's a computer on the left that's going to visit a web server on the right. Say the web server is example.com. This is my first party, like Google on the last diagram. This is the website that I want to visit. My browser sends a request to example.com, and example.com says, okay, here's your content. My browser is processing that content, and it sees, oh, there's something in order to see example.com, I actually have to go out and get some content from ad.doubleclick.net. Okay, So then my browser, on my behalf, without me ever knowing, goes out to add.doubleclick.net. And one of the headers that my computer will send is this referrer header. And yes, it is deliberately misspelled. That is part of the spec. So if you're ever looking for it or whatnot, it is referrer with 3 R's, not 4 R's. And that referrer field tells the second server, hey, I'm coming to you to ask for content because example.com told me to. So my computer connects to add.doubleclick.net, a third party. Add.doubleclick.net says, okay, great, here's the content you wanted. And by the way, set this cookie that your tracking ID is XYZ. So my computer starts holding on to that cookie. The other thing that happens is now add.doubleclick.net, this third party knows, hey, the computer that has a cookie called with tracking ID XYZ likes to visit example.com. Okay, interesting. Later, I'm browsing around the internet and I go to a different site, example.net. Not related to example.com at all, just coincidence. So I go to example.net. It says, great, here's your content you were asking for. By the way, you're gonna need some content from add.doubleclick.net. I say, okay. And by the way, I already have a cookie from doubleclick.net. So when I go out to add.doubleclick.net, I say, hey, I need some content. And by the way, here's my cookie that you asked me to set last time. Add.doubleclick.net says, okay, great, doesn't set a cookie because I've already got a cookie. But now it knows not only do I visit example.com, I also visit example.net. So those could be, for instance, I've been at home adding to my houseplant collection, as it seems from Facebook that lots of people seem to be doing. So now it knows maybe that I like plants and I like gardening. So they're starting to hone in on who I am as a person and what my interests are. Backing up a tiny bit, why would the browser visit add.doubleclick.net? Well, I said because example.com and example.net tell it to, but why? It could be some JavaScript that runs in the background. It could be a tiny image called a pixel. There's a number of different reasons, but the top bullet point is the important one because the website I visited told it to. And that comes down to economics. Again, that example.com might be paid from add.doubleclick.net to gather information about me or to display ads. And that information could be sent to them. I could go out and reach out to them just from visiting the page or because I took a specific action. I added an item to the shopping cart or I watched a video. So if I'm on a gardening website and I watch a video about power washing, then it knows if they've got this plumbing hooked up specifically around individual videos, it might be even more specific and they might know, hey, okay, I'm probably a homeowner. I'm probably not a renter if I'm looking at power washing. This is far more, excuse me, this is far more pervasive than you might think. And that brings us to our second demo. I'm going to take 1 second to clear my throat. Bring back Firefox here. I'm going to clear the content one more time. And then I'm going to be using this extension called Lightbeam. It used to be managed directly by Mozilla, and it was much more useful then and less buggy. Unfortunately, it's quite a bit buggier now, but it's still useful to watch. So I cleared my Lightbeam data earlier. Clearing my cookies does not clear the Lightbeam data, but you can start to see, okay, just in the time that I've been in this webinar, I've visited a couple sites. I visited Zoom to get logged in for the webinar. I'm not sure what reached out to chrome.google.com. I visited google.com. You watched me do that. And I visited mobile.weather.com. Those circles are the first parties. The triangles are the third parties. So mobile.weather.com also had me reach out to forecast.weather.gov, geocode.arcgis. And then this one, since they have a line connecting both of them, both sites had me reach out to googleanalytics.com. Kind of interesting. So say I come in at the beginning of the morning. I happen to have my browser set to clear cookies unclosed. So it's a new day, new cookies, nothing's there. And I go to stackoverflow.com. Browsing around, learning some Python, good stuff. Meanwhile, Stack Overflow is installing some more cookies on my computer. Interesting. Not too bad, I suppose. I've only got, I visited 6 sites and I have encountered 28 third-party sites that I've interacted with. Okay, let's visit some more sites. I'm working hard and then I need a little break. I go to slashdot.org. All right, visiting Slashdot, that's kind of entertaining. And then I'm ready for some general news. Let's go to CNN. And I'm actually, one of the things that's buggy about Lightbeam is it doesn't display the logos correctly the first time. So I'm going to close Lightbeam and reopen Lightbeam. I'm starting to get a lot more trackers. So you can see Slashdot, I interacted with all of these third-party sites. Same with CNN. They are really installing a lot of cookies on my computer. And I can zoom in or out here. I'm trying to find out what this one is. Oh, this is poor little mobile.weather.gov behaving up in the corner here. Another great one what you're trying to do is collect cookies is dictionary.com. The other thing about dictionary.com is it sort of rotates through with some dynamic content. I assume it's using Ajax or something. And so not only does it install the cookies, it keeps connecting you to more cookies from more advertisers. So here's dictionary.com. I didn't close Lightbeam, so it doesn't have the logo yet. I visited 9 sites and I've now connected with 250 third-party sites. That was pretty shocking for me the first time I saw that. I've got a display here. If I go back to the slide deck, earlier this morning, I was just trying to visit some really common sites and show what it would look like. So I visited 12 sites earlier this morning and connected with 413 third-party sites. The numbers are a little misleading. It doesn't mean I have 413 trackers because, as you saw when I was mousing over some of them, they're potentially tracking sites, but they could also be multiple domains owned by the site I first visited and just used as part of serving their content. So if you do the math on that, that's roughly 34 potential tracking sites for every one site that I actually deliberately visited, which is a lot. Now Google, I want to talk about separately because they're a bit of a special case. They set these first-party cookies, and the first one makes sense. When you go to google.com, they're first party, they're going to set cookies for google.com, but also Google Analytics. And if you've ever managed a website, you know a little bit about Google Analytics. It gives you this, you install a tiny bit of JavaScript on your website that each time somebody visits your web page, they load this JavaScript. And then you get this really cool dashboard that has all sorts of neat analytics information in exchange about who's visited your website, how they got to your website, what they did on your website. It's awesome. But the kind of sneaky thing they do is they have your website set the cookie, not googleanalytics.com. So earlier when I was looking at mobile.weather.gov, I mentioned that these are from Google Analytics, even though they were set by mobile.weather.gov, these __UMTA and then a letter. So if I were trying to cut back on my tracking, I might say, well, I only want first-party cookies. That isn't going to stop Google Analytics from having these cookies, which might be okay if the cookies were only ever used by the site that they were set by. But there are some special cases in which a different site, a different domain can access cookies set by a domain other than itself. Google also owns doubleclick.net, which is a pretty big ad serving service that they bought, I want to say it was like in 2007. It was quite a long time ago. And in some cases, under certain scenarios, Google will exchange information between the first and third-party cookies to tie together information and gain more info about you. Does anybody remember when Google's model used to be "Don't be evil"? That's not part of their website anymore. They took it down. And I think making decisions like this, not to get too much on my political soapbox, but I think decisions like this might be part of the reason why they decided to stop advertising that. Google's interesting though, because they do a good job of letting you see some of this, of what they know about you based on their ad marketing network and their ad partners, and just from signing into your Gmail account or something, your YouTube account. And they let you go in and look at some of the information, which I find fascinating. I was playing around with this with a friend of mine who was getting some odd ads, and we were trying to figure out what the internet thought was going on with this friend's interests. And so I turned it on my account, and it took very little time for Google to start adding information about me. So they know my age because I had to give my birth date when I signed up for my Gmail account. So yep, I'm between 35 and 44, true. I'm interested in colleges and universities. Well, yeah, I work for the University of Illinois, so that's going to show up. I'm also a student there. Computer and video games, yes, guilty as charged. Education status, I'm slightly insulted in this screenshot. It thought I was only a high school graduate. I don't know if that's Google thinking my interests are immature or what. Later in the day, they did upgrade me to, I can't remember if it was undergraduate degree or some higher ed. So it learns over time. Interested in home and garden, household income, upper middle. I'm not a parent, that is true. I do work for an employer who's probably between 1K and 10K. Definitely interested in computer and electronics, enterprise technology, absolutely. I am a homeowner, I am married, and I have 2 cats. So within an hour or two, Google had some really intimate but basic stuff about my life down without me ever having to tell them. This is just based on them watching what I was looking at on the internet. So it knows when I go to google.com and search for, I don't know, power washers, that, yeah, probably a homeowner. Or it knows when I search for University of Illinois iSchool and then click on that link, like, yep, probably interested in higher ed. So I'm going to show you on the next slide how you can go to this, and you too will be able to see what Google thinks it knows about you and to turn it off so that it stops tracking some of this. There's a variety of different steps that you can take to start taking back some of the control. And they range on a scale from things that are very low risk, that are probably not likely to break your web browsing experience, all the way up through, yep, this is definitely going to break your web browsing experience. So it's a trade-off. The decisions that I make are not necessarily going to be the right decisions for you. I work in security. I'm highly privacy minded. And so I'm willing to trade off that some of the websites may not work for me, and or I may need to futz with them and change some settings in order to get them to work the first time. But here are the things that you can do that are very low risk. You can install an extension that blocks tracking cookies from being accepted on your browser. This won't be all third-party cookies. These will just be lists that these particular companies manage that they think are tracking companies. So the one that I would probably recommend, because it seems to work fairly smoothly, is uBlock Origin. It works on Firefox, Chrome, and I'm not sure about the others. Firefox and Chrome are what I'm most familiar with. It also does some ad blocking, which, as I said, is separate from blocking cookies. Disconnect is another one, and then Privacy Badger. I'm blanking on which one of those is by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think it's Privacy Badger. Those are all reputable extensions for your main browsers. If you're using Internet Explorer, first of all, I'm sorry. Have you tried Firefox or Chrome? But whatever, you do you. You're not going to have as many options for things like this. Internet Explorer, Edge, it's getting better, but just doesn't give you that same level of customization. The other thing you can do is visit myaccount.google.com, and on the left-hand side, you'll click on Data and Personalization. It's highlighted in blue. And the part that you're looking for specifically to see what Google thinks it knows about you is this ad personalization. Again, with the marketing, like, you can make ads more useful to you. I don't want ads to be useful for me, thanks. So you'll click on Go to Ad Settings, and if you scroll down, it'll show you that list that I was showing in the previous slide of everything that it thinks it knows. While you're there, I would recommend tweaking some other privacy things on that same page. By default, anytime you look up something in Google Maps, Google saves that history. Anytime you look up a YouTube video, Google saves that history. Anytime you search your Gmail inbox, if you use Gmail, Google saves that search. Anytime you visit something from google.com, Google saves that information. it's a little scary for someone who likes privacy to be able to go back and see, wow, 6 months ago, I was visiting this particular website about houseplants or whatever. So I turn all of that off. It's up to you. Maybe you look at that and think, hey, there's some benefit to me for this, and I'd like to leave it on. But again, very low risk. This isn't going to break your browsing experience. This isn't going to do anything negative. Websites will still continue to work just fine. No, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, no downside aside from better privacy. Next, we get into medium steps. These are starting to get into something that may cause some inconvenience for you. Up to you whether you want that inconvenience or not. You can set your browser to reject third-party cookies. It's not specific enough to know what's a tracking cookie or not. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons for a website to need you to have a third-party cookie in order to function well. So this may break some functionality on some websites. I had years ago had helped a friend turn this on, and it broke access to his bank. I'm blanking on which bank it was. But at least several years ago, with this setting turned on, there was one major bank that no longer functioned if you have third-party cookies turned off. Now, if you get really savvy, you can turn off third-party cookies and start adding exceptions, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing you can do that's less risky but more inconvenient is to update your browser to delete all cookies and close when it's closed. So that means you're going to lose all your session information. You're going to be logged out of all websites. So you better know your passwords to your website, which as a security person, I should say would be true anyway, or you should be using a password manager, which is even better. But this does mean when I come in at the beginning of the day, if I want to log into my mail on Gmail, or if I want to log into my webmail, I have to do it again. If I'm logging into Amazon, I have to do it again because it doesn't remember me. Now, the plus side is when the tracking companies start up again each day, they're assigning me a new unique identifier. So the only information they would have on me by the end of the day is just what I've done that day. They can't correlate my interests across multiple days or multiple weeks. If you really want to go the hardcore level, and there are 2 people on my team, at least 2 who do this, I'm one of them, go ahead and disable JavaScript and enjoy breaking the internet for yourself. So these screenshots down below, I had JavaScript turned off yesterday, and I was poking around to see what works and what doesn't. So Facebook, it'll let you get as far as logging in because they like knowing who you are, and then it'll say like, oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work without JavaScript. The BBC uses some kind of JavaScript to load their images, so you won't load any images without having JavaScript turned on. That bottom one is Twitter. So I don't have a Twitter account, so I don't sign in. I don't know if it's different if you do, but it'll just tell you, hey, JavaScript's detected. Do you want to look at the legacy Twitter? So at least it gives you an option. I suppose technically Facebook does too. I should not be so cruel towards them, so judgmental. So what I do using NoScript, just to give you an idea of how this works, is I have everything blocked by default, but NoScript allows you to turn on JavaScript for particular domains. So when you first start up, everything's blocked, lots of stuff is broken, and you kind of just start experimenting and turning on, well, what's the least amount of stuff that I can enable and still have this website work? It does get annoying, especially when websites are using something like I just noticed we had a question. Sorry, Jeanette, I'm stealing your thunder here. Do you want to read it?
Sure. The question is, should one even be using Facebook if privacy is taken into account?
It's an interesting question. You could certainly, and it's a very personal decision too, you could certainly say, well, it's all about trade-offs. You could say, no, I don't want to use Facebook because I believe in privacy, and Facebook does all sorts of terrible things, not even related to cookies as far as privacy. On the other hand, you could say, well, Facebook enhances my life, and so I choose to continue to use it, but I have these other controls around what Facebook knows about me. So personal decision. With NoScript, what I ended up doing then is one by one, I started enabling sites I mentioned, but then when I have sites, like there's one website I visit on a regular basis that uses, I think it's Cloudflare, I can't remember, to host some of their dynamic stuff. I will get a dynamic URL each time I visit, and so every time I visit this website that I visit frequently, the content is broken because I have JavaScript turned on, and then I have to go up to the menu and enable JavaScript for that particular new domain. So it depends how much effort you want to put into this. I know that there are people who think that my colleague and I are nuts for using it. On the other hand, blocking JavaScript also blocks a ton of ads. And so that means pages load faster for me, and I don't see ads. And so for me, the trade-off is worth it.
Real quick, we had one comment replying to the question about Facebook, saying that this person uses the Facebook container extension in Firefox.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for chiming in on that. I'm not familiar with that, but that sounds very promising. So that brings us to our second to last slide. Just a couple of points that I wanted to kind of hit one last time. And I should mention too, I didn't provide the links for how to do some of these in these previous slides, like installing an extension. I did provide the link for updating your Google ad preferences, setting your browser. These are things that you can easily Google for. So that's how I would recommend it to find the most up-to-date information, because they change the URLs so fast that by the time I had them on the slide, they'd practically be out of date. But if you're interested in doing any of this, go ahead and Google it for your browser of choice, and you should be able to find steps on how to do it. So closing points here, cookies aren't an inherently evil technology. They can be used to track you in ways that they can be used in ways that enhance your web browsing experience, like cookies, like I showed with mobile.weather.gov. It's convenient for me to not have to type in champagne every time. I probably would never in my regular life edit that cookie. It was just a way to demo stuff, but I might search for Las Vegas again and have that show up in my list, and then I don't have to keep searching for it each time. The bad news is you're probably being tracked a lot more than you realize. Of course, the good news is there are steps you can take to decrease that. And then the ugly news is it's an arms race between privacy advocates and the marketing companies. I didn't have enough time in this talk to go into things like flash cookies or ever cookies that are making it harder and harder for end users to be able to delete that information stored on their computer. Some servers also do things like browser fingerprinting, where they try and figure out more about you just based on the information you've provided them without even trying to store anything on your computer. So this is one of those take a while. You can cut down on a lot of it. You probably can't cut down all of it without making it very unusable for yourself. I've only got a minute to flash these URLs on the screen, but they will be in the YouTube video after the presentation. If you're interested in learning more about this and the underlying technology, I recommend these links on the top. If you would like to know more about the impact and particular opinions of people who have investigated this, I would recommend that link from The Atlantic, which was written by someone who was an end user who dug into this. And then security expert Bruce Schneier has also written an entire book about this, which is really fascinating and terrifying to read, that sort of digs into the shady underbelly of online advertising. I want to thank you all for attending the talk, and I will hand it back to Jeanette.
Yes, I'm going to just go through a few things to give people a moment to type. First of all, thank you everyone for attending our presentation. This is the Q&A session now, so feel free to type your questions in there. We are recording this, and so I will be posting the video to the original blog post once that has been uploaded. For more information about the cybersecurity division, you could go to security.ncsa.illinois.edu. And at Twitter, you can find us at NCSA Security, one word. So let us know what you think. And we had a question earlier in the presentation, Kay, how do I watch YouTube anonymously?
Wow, that's a great question. It depends on well, let me think about this. So each time you get one of those unique IDs in a cookie, it doesn't know anything about your previous unique IDs. So you can use I can't remember what Firefox calls it, but basically the private browsing where it clears stuff after the fact. There's also, I would recommend the biggest thing is don't be logged into your Gmail or Google account, because as I was mentioning earlier, Google and YouTube are both owned by Google, and it does keep a record of all of that. It depends on how anonymous you mean to. If you're really trying to get into, you don't want your ISP to know and all this stuff, without me adding any sort of value judgment on top of that, there are technologies like Tor or a VPN that make it harder to trace that traffic back to your computer. So there's anonymous from the sense of, can YouTube identify that you're the same person or a particular person with a YouTube account? There's anonymous in the sense of who between me and YouTube also knows that I've accessed this URL. So I would recommend Googling for some more information about that.
Thanks. The next question, is the university planning to deploy an ad blocker globally?
So I work for NCSA, which is one department of the university, and I do communicate with campus security on a regular basis about some particular areas, but as far as that, that's not something I'm aware of. I would say, just speaking off the cuff, in my personal opinion, something like that would be very hard to do, because what's an ad to one person may be somebody else's research area. I mean, when you look at doing something like running a proxy, you start in front, which would be something that you tunnel people's traffic so that when it leaves the campus, it would have to go through this checkpoint of, is this allowed, yes or no, which can be helpful because it can stop particular requests to third parties, but it can also be detrimental. And then you also start to have privacy concerns. I think something like that is much more common in the enterprise sector, in the private sector, where you don't have these concerns about academic freedom and you don't have people researching areas that other people might find objectionable.
I think we have a clarifying comment here that Firefox calls it a private window and Chrome calls it incognito mode.
Excellent, thank you.
We got another one here. Could you say some more things about Flash cookies, please?
I don't know a ton about them, to be honest. I researched them when I created this talk originally, and I haven't looked at them since. So I guess I would recommend just Googling, to be honest. I don't know a ton about it.
Okay. What are some examples of cookies used for something more sinister than showing personalized ads?
Great question. Well, I would first of all recommend checking out Bruce Schneider's book, because it's been a while since I read it, but I remember being shocked and horrified about some things. Personalized ads, I would say, can be more sinister than you might think. So there was that famous case, I don't know how many years ago, about some young girl started receiving in the mail, I think it was like coupons off diapers, because based on her web browsing history, and she had logged into Target's site and purchased something not related to babies, but they were able to say, here's where it gets tricky, is they can say, okay, I see this pattern of browsing behavior from you. I also have this other pattern of browsing behavior that I've noticed that tends to be correlated with other people who are pregnant. And so this girl's family ended up finding out that she was pregnant before she had told them, because the trackers were able to figure out, associated with Target, were able to figure out that she was pregnant. They can also do correlations of things like just things that are considered private that you might not want companies knowing about you, and you might not want being splashed up on your web browser as you're sharing your screen or at home or anything like that. Like if you have a health concern that you may not want other people knowing, you may not want your employer knowing, things like that. And so while things like running shoes and power washers and houseplants don't seem too sinister, and I don't think that the companies intend it to be sinister, we can quickly get into things that most people would consider privacy violations.
Thank you. I'm just going to address a couple more comments about Flash. One person has reminded us that Flash is going end of life by the end of the year. So I'm going to set the questions about Flash aside. Another thing is one of the people suggested to turn off the YouTube sync in the activity in your YouTube account as a way to stop to watch videos anonymously, if I'm understanding their suggestion correctly.
Oh, can I chime in on that one?
Yeah, sure.
Yep, that is definitely, and that is directly related to when you go to that Google account page as well. That's where you can turn that off. That, let me go back to that slide that had that information. My account at google.com. There may be some separate ones inside of YouTube that I haven't looked at, but I know your YouTube history is also controlled at this particular my account at google.com. But it sounds like there may be something else as well directly in the YouTube account. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Sure. We've got 9 minutes left, so we'll try to get through the rest of these. I've received a Moodle message that says, it seems your browser is blocking third-party session cookies, which are required for the Kaltura application. To remove this issue, please update your settings to allow third-party cookies. I'm hopeless with technology. May I email you to get help on this? Thank you.
That's very sweet. I had used Kaltura, or I had the opportunity to use Kaltura, I should say, for class at one point, and I also ran into some issues. I ended up talking with the Kaltura folks, so that's what I would recommend. Not because I'm unhappy to help, I'd be happy to help you. It's just I don't remember what I did to fix some of those issues, and they're going to be much better at that than I am. I mean, I suppose if you try and talk to them and they don't know what third-party cookies are, but they should, because I had something similar going on.
We've got another question here. What is website fingerprinting?
It's browser fingerprinting. So if we think back to that first demo that I did, where I was showing you the very first request that my machine made to go out to Google, I sent Google a lot of information about my computer just with my request. And so it's storing those sorts of things to try and associate them also with your IP address. And if you're behind something like a firewall where there's multiple machines sharing the same IP address, it's them collecting and gathering that information to say, okay, when somebody else comes back with, for instance, that particular user agent string, what version of browser are you using, what operating system are you using, other bits that you have configured in your browser about the way that you interacted with Google, can they say with some level of certainty when another request comes in, this looks really similar to that other request, even though there was no cookie, they didn't say that they'd sent me, that they'd reached out to me before, but is this the same person? And trying to do that without any intervention on the browser's part. So trying to correlate that you're the same person without your browser having to do anything and be involved in it, besides doing the things it does by default to send information about itself to the server.
Going back to the Lightbeam demo, the example showed primary sites that you visited, then third-party sites that were referenced. Is this the end of the tree, or can those third-party sites refer to yet more sites, i.e. does the Lightbeam show the whole tree, or is this just the one level deep view into it?
I haven't dug too much into how Lightbeam itself behaves, and my guess is that Lightbeam tends to count more things as actual trackers than they actually are. Well, it doesn't say explicitly they're trackers, so I should say yes, it counts the third parties. I think it's possible that your browser can make a request out to a third party and it gets redirected to another. My hunch is that that's uncommon, but to be honest, it's not something that I have dug into that much at all.
Someone's asking for browser suggestions. Would you recommend Brave browser or using Tails Linux distro?
I have someone on my team who I'm sure would love to be able to speak right now, because I know he's got opinions about it and he's done a lot of research about it. The reason, I'll answer that in sort of a roundabout way. The reason I use Firefox is, at least for me, I feel like it offers the right level between privacy, customization, and things just working out of the box. So it depends on your skill level and what you're comfortable with.
So this is an interesting question, possibly paranoia, but just because you click on some of these privacy settings, say my account.google.com, and disable some feature, does it really work? Or do they just say that they're turning it off to make you feel good?
That's a great question. And there's been a lot of lawsuits about things related to this. And part of it is this really hard to know as a consumer? We're trusting that that is the case. Now, what I can say is I stopped seeing personalized ads when I turn off the tracking and those sorts of things. But can I actually prove it as a consumer, as the end user on my computer? I really can't. And it's interesting, one of the technologies that was designed to combat some of this is sending a do not track cookie. And I haven't done a ton of research into this. This is a bit off the cuff, but once upon a time, I had read that just by sending this flag, then some companies would then do more in-depth browser fingerprinting and use the fact that you were sending a do not track against you to gather more information. So I think there are definitely abuses, and that gets into the arms race of, can technologies sort of get on edge cases of what's allowed by the spec and what the browsers will accept and use it to their advantage.
One person's responding to this point. I think GDPR has made it so the companies are more likely to actually follow through with these.
True, for people in Europe. There's also people in California, they have a lot more protection than the rest of us. So you start to see things in certain websites where they will allow you more privacy if you're in California, but if you're not, then you're still going to get the regular tracking.
Yep, I've heard similar things to that effect. Okay, cookie hygiene. I clear cookies regularly, multiple times a day. Is multiple clearing basically, does it keep me more incognito than clearing once a day? Is there, what's your cookie hygiene, Kay?
My cookie hygiene, I guess, goes back to how much my balance of usability versus control. So I am running NoScript, which means I'm not running JavaScript from most sites. The other thing that I haven't mentioned is actually at home, we run something called Pi-hole, which is a DNS black holing service, which in order to do this talk with Lightbeam, I had to turn off and stop using this Raspberry Pi server running this Pi-hole software and connect out to a public web server instead. So if you really want to get into some of that, you can look at Pi-hole. What happens normally at home is I use this as a DNS server, and it has this list that it keeps of blocked sites that are associated with tracking, et cetera, and it won't even load them. It won't even resolve them. So I can't even pull down an IP address if I would normally try and go to, like, Google Analytics was blocked by default for a while until my husband is the one who runs it. And so I had told him, like, hey, I need Google Analytics for managing a website that I work on. So we actually had to allow that one. So long answer, there are more things you can do that are more technical like that. I do not clear my cookies multiple times a day because I feel like I've got enough other levels of protection. And I'm also very lucky that I don't need to do anything that I'm super concerned about other people finding out about. So I don't have anything I'm particularly concerned about them knowing about me. I hate them knowing anything about me, but it's not something in particular.
Let's do one more question, and actually 2 questions came in that are very similar, so the cookies are watching.
Yeah.
Is there software that will automatically visit random sites to obfuscate your browsing data or corrupt it in some way to maintain your privacy?
That is too funny, because I was just discussing this with my husband, where he was talking about that he wanted to write a script that would visit like 1,000 random sites every night or something. There may be, I'm not familiar with it if there is. So for those of you who don't know, my husband also works for NCSA on the security team.
So we're just handing out brilliant ideas for software projects, sounds like.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you so much, Kay, for this presentation. Thank you all of you for joining. I will be requesting that this video be uploaded to the NCSA YouTube channel. So you can check back at the blog post for information about the video if you want to share it with some colleagues. With that, I will end the meeting, but thank you all of you again for attending this talk, and we hopefully will be in contact with you next quarter for the next security talk. And thanks again, Kay.
Thanks, Jeanette.